The harsh late autumn wind howled across the plains of West Texas, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of a bitter winter to come. Benjamin Foster pulled his worn leather duster tighter around his broad shoulders as he guided his horse through the darkness toward home. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rolling landscape and his modest ranch just ahead. The year was 1878, and at 32 years old, Ben had carved out a respectable living for himself outside San Antonio, Texas, not wealthy by any means, but comfortable enough with his small cattle operation and the peace that came with solitude. The storm was worsening by the minute. Fat raindrops began pelting down as Ben dismounted at his barn, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. His gelding, Thunder, snorted impatiently as Ben slid the heavy wooden door open against the wind's resistance. "Easy now," he murmured, leading the horse inside the shadowy structure. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and livestock enveloped him as he closed the door against the weather's fury. Ben struck a match, lighting the lantern that hung just inside the entrance. The warm glow spread across the barn's interior, casting long shadows along the walls. That's when he heard a small, startled intake of breath from the far corner. Ben's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. "Who's there?" His voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to handling trouble on his own terms. Silence answered him, but Ben's keen eyes had already spotted movement in the shadows behind a stack of hay bales. He moved the lantern higher, its light reaching deeper into the darkness. "I know you're there. Come on out now." His tone was firm but not threatening. After a moment's hesitation, a figure emerged slowly from behind the hay. Ben's breath caught in his throat. A young woman stood before him, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair that had escaped from what once must have been a neat bun. Her dress, though of good quality, was torn and mudded. But it was her face that made Ben's jaw tighten. One eye was swollen nearly shut, her lips split, and dark bruises marked her delicate jawline. She flinched when he took a step forward, pressing herself back against the wall. Her eyes, one green and clear, the other barely visible through the swelling, were wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't steal anything. I just needed shelter from the storm." Ben slowly removed his hat, trying to appear less intimidating. "Miss, I'm not going to hurt you." "That's what they all say," she replied, a bitter edge to her voice that spoke volumes about what she had endured. Ben carefully hung the lantern on a hook and slowly raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Benjamin Foster. This is my ranch. You're welcome to shelter here." The woman didn't relax, but her eyes darted to the barn door where the sound of rain was now a steady drumbeat. Lightning flashed again, illuminating her pale face in stark relief. "What's your name?" Ben asked quietly. She hesitated, weighing her options before finally answering. Madeline Garner." "Well, Miss Garner, you look like you could use some help," Ben said, his gaze taking in her bruised face and the way she cradled one arm protectively against her body. "And maybe a doctor." "No doctors," she said sharply, then winced at the pain speaking caused her. "No one can know I'm here." Ben studied her for a long moment, noting the fear that seemed to radiate from her slender frame. He'd seen that look before in wounded animals and in men who'd survived the war. It was the look of something hunted. "Whoever did this to you," Ben said softly, gesturing to her injuries, "they're not welcome on my land. No one will touch you again, not while I'm breathing." The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Madeline's eyes filled with unshed tears, but her expression remained wary, as if she'd heard promises before that had proven worthless. "You don't know what you're saying," she finally responded. "You don't know who he is." "I don't need to know," Ben replied simply. This is my land, and on my land, certain things don't happen. Hurting women is one of them. A crash of thunder shook the barn, making Madeline jump. Ben noticed how she swayed slightly, steadying herself against the wall. "Miss Garner, I'm going to make you an offer. My house isn't far, just there." He pointed toward the window where, through the rain-streaked glass, the lights of his ranch house glowed warm and inviting. "You can have a proper meal, dry clothes, and a safe place to rest. No strings attached. And tomorrow?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next," Ben replied honestly. "But tonight, you need care for those injuries." Madeline's gaze flicked from Ben to the window, then back again. She seemed to be weighing her limited options. "I have a spare room with a lock on the inside," Ben added, understanding her hesitation. "You'd be completely secure." Something in his steady gaze or honest words must have convinced her, for Madeline gave a small nod. "I can't go far anyway," she admitted. "I think my ankle is sprained." Ben nodded, keeping his distance. "May I approach to help you walk?" After another moment's hesitation, Madeline nodded again. Ben moved slowly, every step deliberate until he stood beside her. Up close, her injuries looked even worse, and a protective anger flared in his chest. Whoever had done this deserved far worse than a beating themselves. "I'll take care of Thunder first, then we'll get you to the house," Ben explained, quickly unsaddling his horse and making sure the animal had feed and water. When he returned to Madeline, she was leaning more heavily against the wall, fatigue evident in every line of her body. Ben carefully offered his arm, and after a moment she accepted it. "It's just a short walk," he promised as they stepped toward the barn door. "Ready." Madeline took a deep breath, wincing at the pain it caused her ribs. "As I'll ever be, Mr. Foster." "Ben," he corrected gently. "Just Ben." Together they stepped out into the rain, Madeline limping heavily beside him. Ben adjusted his pace to hers, shielding her as much as possible with his duster as they made their way toward the welcoming lights of his home. By the time they reached the porch, Madeline was leaning heavily against him, her breathing labored. Ben opened the door and helped her inside, where the warmth of a fireplace and the smell of coffee welcomed them. The interior of Ben's home was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy wooden table, a few chairs, and a worn but clean sofa near the hearth. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a ranch house. "Let me show you to that room I mentioned," Ben said, guiding her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small but neat bedroom with a single bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window currently being lashed by rain. As promised, the door had a solid bolt on the inside. "You can rest here. I'll bring you some hot water and bandages for those cuts, and then some food if you're up to it." Madeline stood in the doorway, looking almost bewildered by the kindness. "Why are you doing this?" Ben considered her question seriously. "My ma raised me to believe that how you treat people who need help says more about you than anything else you might accomplish in life." A sad smile touched his lips. "She passed when I was 16, but I try to live by her words." Madeline didn't respond, but some of the tension left her shoulders. "I'll be right back with that water," Ben said, turning to leave. "Make yourself comfortable." When Ben returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a small box of medical supplies, Madeline was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking small and vulnerable in the lamplight. "May I?" he asked, indicating her injuries. She nodded silently, and Ben set about gently cleaning the cuts on her face. She winced but didn't complain. "These should heal clean," he said after a while, "but your eye's going to be swollen for a few days." "It's not the first time," Madeline replied quietly. then immediately looked as if she regretted the admission. Ben's hand stilled for a moment, but he didn't press her. "Can you move your arm all right? The one you were favoring," Madeline demonstrated, moving it slowly. "It's just bruised, I think, not broken. And your ankle, twisted when I was running. I've been walking on it too much." Ben nodded, setting aside the cloth. "You should rest it, and you need dry clothes." He moved to the chest of drawers and pulled out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're clean and dry." Madeline accepted them with a small thank you. "I'll make you something to eat," Ben offered. "You can change and rest. There's a key for the door there on the nightstand if you want it." Madeline looked at the key, then back at Ben. Something in his straightforward manner and the careful way he had tended her injuries seemed to have eased her fear somewhat. "I'll be fine," she said softly. Ben nodded and left, closing the door behind him. In the kitchen, he stoked the fire in the stove and set about preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread he had left over from earlier. As he worked, his mind turned over the situation. Madeline Garner was clearly running from someone who had hurt her badly and repeatedly, judging by her comment and her fear. Ben had no illusions about the kind of danger harboring her might bring to his door, but he couldn't find it in himself to regret his offer of sanctuary. Not when he remembered the terror in her eyes and the bruises on her face. 20 minutes later, he knocked gently on her door. "Miss Garner, I've brought some food if you're hungry." After a moment, the door opened. Madeline had changed into his clothes, which indeed engulfed her slender frame. She had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs and had tied a piece of twine around the waist of the trousers to keep them up. Despite the ill-fitting clothes and her injuries, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tray he offered. "This is very kind. It's nothing fancy," Ben apologized. "It smells wonderful," Madeline replied, and Ben noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she set the tray on the small table by the window. She must have been starving. "I'll leave you to eat in peace," Ben said. "If you need anything else, I'll be in the main room." Madeline nodded, but as Ben turned to leave, she spoke again. "Mr. Foster, Ben, I don't know how to thank you properly." Ben shook his head. "No need for thanks, just rest and heal up." He left her then, returning to the main room where he poured himself a cup of coffee and settled into his chair by the fire. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside his home, Ben felt an unfamiliar sense of purpose. Whoever was looking for Madeline Garner would have to go through him first, and Ben Foster was not a man easily moved when he'd set his mind to something. In the bedroom, Madeline ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple but hearty food. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, she felt something akin to safety. She knew it might be fleeting Thomas would be looking for her, and he had resources and connections throughout the county. But for tonight, at least, she could rest without fear of a drunken rage or violent hands. After eating, exhaustion overtook her, and Madeline curled up on the bed, pulling the clean quilt around her shoulders. The sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder lulled her towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was of the surprising gentleness in Benjamin Foster's weathered hands as he tended her wounds, and the steel in his voice when he'd promised no one would hurt her again. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the small window. Madeline awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the pain in her face and ribs reminded her. She sat up slowly, wincing at her various aches, and listened carefully to the sounds of the house. She could hear movement in another part of the home, the soft clink of cookware and the crackle of a fire being stoked. Taking a deep breath, Madeline rose and straightened her borrowed clothes as best she could. After using the small basin of water left on the dresser to wash her face and smooth her tangled hair, she cautiously opened the door. The smell of coffee and frying bacon led her to the kitchen, where Ben stood at the stove. He was already dressed for the day in a clean shirt and work pants, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," Madeline said softly. Ben turned, a genuine smile warming his features. "Good morning. How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," Madeline admitted. "Thank you." "Hungry?" Ben asked, gesturing to the skillet where bacon sizzled alongside some sliced potatoes. Madeline nodded, moving closer to the warmth of the stove. The morning was chilly, and Ben's borrowed clothes offered little protection against the cold. "Here," Ben said, handing her a cup of steaming coffee. "This will help with the chill." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the cup, and Madeline tried to ignore the small jolt that ran through her at the contact. It had been so long since a man's touch had meant anything but pain. "Your eye looks a bit better this morning," Ben observed, turning back to the stove to flip the bacon. "Still pretty swollen, though." Madeline touched her face gingerly. "It feels a little better." They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, a somewhat awkward silence between them until Ben finally spoke. "I'm not going to pry into your business, Miss Garner." "Madeline, please," she interrupted. After all he had done, formality seemed unnecessary. Ben nodded. "Madeline, as I was saying, I won't pry, but I do need to ask what your plans are. Not because I'm eager to see you leave," he added quickly, "but because I want to help if I can." Madeline set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. "I don't have much of a plan beyond getting as far away from San Antonio as possible." "And the man who hurt you?" Ben asked quietly. Madeline's gaze dropped to the table. "My husband, Thomas Garner. He's a banker in San Antonio. Well-respected, wealthy, and very good at making sure no one sees what happens behind closed doors." Ben's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "How long were you married?" 3 years. It wasn't always like this." Madeline gestured vaguely to her face. "At first he was charming, generous. My father had just died, leaving my mother and me with debts. Thomas seemed like salvation." A bitter laugh escaped her. "The first time he hit me was 6 months after our wedding. He apologized so beautifully afterwards, swore it would never happen again." "But it did," Ben said, not a question but a statement. Madeline nodded. "Each time worse than the last. This time." She swallowed hard. "This time I thought he might kill me, so when he passed out drunk, I took what little money I could find and ran." "How did you end up at my barn?" "I've been moving at night, staying hidden during the day. I walked for miles after the stagecoach dropped me at the crossroads. When the storm hit, I saw your barn and slipped inside." Madeline looked up at him, her good eye bright with unshed tears. "I never meant to involve anyone else in my troubles." Ben reached across the table, hesitating before gently covering her hand with his own. "You've involved no one. I offered help freely." "You don't understand," Madeline said, her voice strained. "Thomas will come looking for me. He won't accept that I've left him. In his mind, I'm his possession, and he doesn't surrender what belongs to him." "Let him come," Ben replied, and there was something in his quiet tone that made Madeline believe he meant it. "This is my land, my home. He has no power here." Madeline wanted desperately to believe him, but experience had taught her that Thomas Garner's reach was long and his vengeance terrible. "I should move on," she said reluctantly. "I've imposed enough, and I can't risk bringing trouble to your door." "And go where?" Ben asked practically. "With what money? In what condition?" He gestured to her injuries. "At least stay until you're healed enough to travel safely." Madeline hesitated, torn between fear of staying too long in one place and the undeniable reality that she was in no condition to continue her flight. "1 week," Ben suggested. Give yourself 1 week to rest and heal. Then, if you still want to leave, I'll help you get wherever you want to go safely." It was a sensible proposal, and Madeline found herself nodding in agreement. 1 week. Ben smiled, and Madeline was struck by how the expression transformed his solemn face, bringing warmth to his blue eyes and softening the lines that spoke of years working under the harsh Texas sun. "Good," he said, rising from the table. "First things first, you'll need some proper clothes. I have some ranch work to attend to this morning, but this afternoon I can ride into town and pick up a few necessities." Madeline's eyes widened in alarm. "You can't tell anyone I'm here." "I won't," Ben assured her. "I'll just say the items are for my sister who's coming to visit. No one will question it." Madeline still looked uncertain, but she nodded. "I can pay you back eventually, I promise." "We'll worry about that later," Ben said, dismissing her concern. "For now, just focus on resting that ankle and getting your strength back." After breakfast, Ben left to tend to his cattle and check the fences that might have been damaged in the storm. Madeline, left alone in the house, found herself restless despite her injuries. Years of managing a household had ingrained in her a need to be productive, and sitting idle made her anxious. She began by washing the breakfast dishes, a simple task that brought a small sense of normalcy. Then, moving carefully on her tender ankle, she explored the house more thoroughly. Ben's home was modest but well-maintained. The main room served multiple purposes with its cooking area, dining table, and sitting space near the fireplace. Besides the room she occupied, there was one other bedroom, Ben's, which she respectfully didn't enter, and a small study filled with more books than she would have expected for a cattle rancher. The titles surprised her: histories, poetry, novels by Dickens and Twain, and practical manuals on everything from animal husbandry to carpentry. Whoever Benjamin Foster was, he was not the uneducated cowboy she might have initially assumed. By midday, Madeline had managed to tidy the already neat house and was resting her ankle when Ben returned for a quick meal. "You didn't have to clean," he said, noticing the freshly swept floor and the rearranged items on the mantel. "I wanted to," Madeline replied. "I'm not used to sitting idle, and it was the least I could do to thank you." Ben seemed about to argue, but instead nodded in understanding. "I appreciate it, though you're a guest, not a housekeeper." "Perhaps we could say I'm earning my keep," Madeline suggested. Ben smiled at that. "If it makes you feel better, I won't argue." He washed his hands at the basin and then joined her at the table where she had prepared a simple lunch of bread and cold meat. "I'll head into town after we eat. Is there anything specific you need besides basic clothing?" Madeline thought for a moment. "A hairbrush would be nice, and perhaps some soap." She touched her tangled hair self-consciously. "Consider it done," Ben promised. "I should be back before sundown. Will you be all right here alone?" The question held no judgment or doubt, merely concern, and Madeline found herself touched by his consideration. "I'll be fine. The doors lock, and I doubt anyone would come calling at a remote ranch on a weekday." Ben nodded, satisfied, and they finished their meal in companionable silence. After lunch, he saddled Thunder and rode toward town, leaving Madeline alone with her thoughts. The afternoon passed slowly. Madeline found a book of poetry in Ben's study and lost herself in Wordsworth's verses, the familiar words a comfort in strange surroundings. As promised, Ben returned before sunset, his saddlebags bulging with packages. "I hope these will do," he said, laying out his purchases on the table. There were 2 simple dresses in practical cotton, a nightgown, undergarments, which he handed over with a hint of embarrassment, a hairbrush, soap, and a few other necessities. "The shopkeeper's wife helped me select appropriate items." I told her they were for my sister who'd lost her luggage while traveling. Madeline examined the dresses, one in a muted blue, the other a soft brown, noting the quality of the fabric and the careful stitching. These are perfect. Thank you. There's one more thing, Ben said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small jar. Arnica salve for your bruises. The apothecary said it should help with the swelling and pain. Madeline accepted the jar, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. I don't know what to say. You've been so kind to a complete stranger. You're not a stranger anymore, Ben replied simply. You're someone who needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. Madeline felt tears threatening and quickly blinked them away. She had cried enough in the past few years. She wouldn't waste more tears now, even if they were born of gratitude rather than pain. Did you hear anything in town? She asked hesitantly. About anyone asking questions? Ben shook his head. Nothing. San Antonio's a good 30 miles from here, and news travels slowly in these parts unless it's brought by stagecoach or telegram. He hesitated before adding, but if your husband is as determined as you say, it might be wise to consider what you'll do when he starts searching this area. Madeline nodded grimly. I've been thinking about that all day. I have an aunt in Colorado. She might take me in, at least until I can find work. That sounds like a good plan, Ben agreed. Once you're healed enough to travel, we can figure out how to get you there safely. That evening, they shared another simple meal, and Madeline found herself relaxing in Ben's presence. There was something comforting about his steady manner and quiet strength. Unlike Thomas, who filled every space with his voice and opinions, Ben seemed content with silence, speaking only when he had something worth saying. After dinner, Madeline excused herself to change into one of her new dresses, relieved to be out of Ben's oversized clothes. When she returned to the main room, she caught Ben staring at her, an unreadable expression on his face. Is something wrong? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Ben shook his head quickly. No, not at all. It's just, the color suits you. Madeline felt a blush warming her cheeks. It had been a long time since anyone had paid her a compliment without ulterior motives. Thank you. They spent the evening by the fire, Ben working on mending a piece of tack while Madeline continued reading the book of poetry. The domesticity of the scene struck her how natural it felt to share this quiet space with him. How different from the tense evenings in her San Antonio home where she'd constantly walked on eggshells, afraid of triggering Thomas's temper. As the days passed, Madeline's strength returned. The swelling in her face subsided, revealing a beauty that had been obscured by her injuries. Her ankle healed enough that she could walk without pain, and the dark bruises on her arms faded to yellowish smudges. Ben taught her about ranch life, how to feed the chickens he kept for eggs, how to milk the single cow in the small paddock near the house, and the names of his cattle that grazed the surrounding pastures. Madeline, in turn, took over more of the household duties, cooking meals that were more varied than Ben's bachelor fare and keeping the house in order. They fell into an easy rhythm together, and Madeline found herself dreading the approach of the one-week deadline they had agreed upon. Each evening, as they sat by the fire, she would catch herself watching Ben, the way his strong hands moved as he worked, the thoughtful expression he wore when raiding, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when something amused him. On the 6th day, as Madeline was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she noticed a cloud of dust in the distance, a rider approaching fast. Fear clutched at her heart. Had Thomas found her already? She hurried inside, her heart pounding. Ben was out checking the herd, too far away to warn. Madeline rushed to his bedroom where she knew he kept a shotgun. With trembling hands, she loaded it as Ben had shown her earlier that week. Just in case, he'd said. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Madeline positioned herself by the window, the shotgun ready. A moment later, a knock came at the door. "Hello? Anyone home?" called a male voice, unfamiliar to Madeline. She remained silent, watching through the window as a young man in a sheriff's deputy uniform peered around the property. "Mr. Foster, it's Deputy Wilson. Got a message for you." Madeline hesitated. This wasn't Thomas, but it could be someone sent by him. Many law enforcement officers in San Antonio owed Thomas favors or were in his pocket through his position at the bank. The deputy knocked again, then shrugged and pulled an envelope from his pocket. He wedged it into the doorframe, mounted his horse, and rode away. Only when he was a distant speck on the horizon did Madeline lower the shotgun and cautiously open the door. The envelope had Ben's name written on it in a neat hand. Madeline brought it inside, setting it on the table for Ben's return. Despite her curiosity and concern, she wouldn't violate his privacy by opening his mail. An hour later, Ben returned, his expression brightening when he saw Madeline waiting. "Something smells good," he commented, noticing the stew simmering on the stove. "There was a visitor," Madeline said without preamble. "A deputy. He left this for you." She handed him the envelope. Ben's expression turned serious as he opened the letter and read its contents. His brow furrowed deeply. "What is it?" Madeline asked. Unable to contain her anxiety any longer, Ben looked up, his blue eyes troubled. "It's from Sheriff Roberts in San Antonio. Apparently, a banker named Thomas Garner has reported his wife missing, possibly kidnapped. They're asking all the surrounding counties to keep an eye out for her." Madeline sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "He's looking for me." "Yes," Ben confirmed, setting the letter down. "The description matches you perfectly right down to the color of your eyes." "What are you going to do?" Madeline whispered, fear making her voice tremble. "You could get in serious trouble for harboring me." Ben's expression hardened. "I'm not turning you over to a man who beats his wife, legal husband or not." "But the law doesn't always protect those who need protecting," Ben interrupted gently. "I've seen that firsthand." Madeline stared at him, realizing how little she actually knew about this man who had shown her such kindness. "What do you mean?" Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My sister, Hannah, was married to a man not unlike your Thomas. Respected businessman, charming in public, a monster in private." His voice grew distant, as if looking back through a painful memory. "She tried to leave him 3 times. Each time the law sent her right back, telling her it was her duty to honor her marriage vows." Madeline's heart ached at the bitterness in his tone. "What happened to her?" The 4th time she tried to leave, he caught her packing. Ben's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He beat her so badly she never woke up. The official ruling was that she fell down the stairs." "Oh, Ben," Madeline breathed, understanding now his immediate willingness to help her. "I'm so sorry." "It was 5 years ago," Ben said, his voice steadier now. "I moved here afterward, needed a fresh start away from the memories. But I swore I'd never stand by while someone suffered like Hannah did." Madeline reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me, and for everything you've done." Ben squeezed her hand gently. "The point is, I understand the danger you're in, and I won't send you back to it. But we need to be more careful now. If the sheriff is sending notices to surrounding counties, your husband is serious about finding you." "What should we do?" Madeline asked, her mind racing with scenarios, each worse than the last. "We stick to the original plan," Ben decided. "You still want to go to your aunt in Colorado?" Madeline nodded. "She's my mother's sister. They lost touch after my mother married, but I remember her address in Denver. She was always kind to me as a child." "Then that's where we'll get you to," Ben said decisively. But we'll need to be smart about it. No stagecoach, they'd be watching those, and we can't risk the train stations either." "How then?" Madeline asked. Ben thought for a moment. "I have a friend with a wagon train heading north next week. They're taking cattle to markets in Colorado. I could ask if you could join them." "Would they agree to that?" "Marcus Reynolds owes me a favor or two," Ben said with a small smile. "And he's a good man. He'd understand the situation." Madeline felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that there might be a way to escape Thomas's reach, sadness that it meant leaving Ben. In just a few short days, his home had become a haven, and his presence a comfort she hadn't known she was missing. "Then I suppose we have a plan," she said softly. That night, after they had eaten and cleaned up, an unusual tension hung in the air. Their 1-week agreement was nearly up, and both seemed acutely aware of it. Madeline sat in what had become her usual chair by the fire, but she couldn't focus on her book. Her mind kept returning to the letter from the sheriff and what it meant. "Penny for your thoughts," Ben said, breaking the silence. Madeline looked up to find him watching her, his expression gentle. "I was thinking about tomorrow, about leaving." Ben set aside the knife he'd been sharpening. "Having second thoughts. Not about leaving Thomas," Madeline clarified quickly. "I can never go back to that life, but—" She hesitated, uncertain how to express the complicated emotions swirling within her. "But," Ben prompted. "I felt safe here," Madeline admitted. "Safer than I've felt in years. The thought of leaving that behind is frightening." Ben's expression softened. "You don't have to leave tomorrow just because that's what we agreed. The wagon train won't leave for another week anyway." Madeline looked up in surprise. "You wouldn't mind if I stayed longer, mind?" Ben repeated, a smile touching his lips. "Madeline, having you here has been—" He searched for the right word. "It's made this place feel more like a home than it has in a long time." The honesty in his voice made Madeline's heart beat faster. "I've felt the same way," she confessed. "Being here with you, it's shown me what a real home could feel like, what a real partnership could be." They looked at each other across the room, the firelight casting a warm glow between them. Something was changing, shifting from the simple dynamic of rescuer and rescued to something deeper, something neither had anticipated. Ben was the first to look away, clearing his throat. "It's getting late. We should probably turn in." Madeline nodded, though part of her wished the moment could have lasted longer. "Good night, Ben." "Good night, Madeline." The next morning brought rain again, a gentle spring shower that painted the landscape in vibrant greens and brought the scent of damp earth through the open windows. Ben left early to check on a pregnant heifer, promising to return by midday. Madeline busied herself with baking bread, finding comfort in the familiar routine of kneading dough and waiting for it to rise. As she worked, she thought about her situation. The sensible thing would be to continue with the plan to reach Denver and her aunt's house. It was the safest option, putting distance between herself and Thomas. But as the days had passed, Madeline had begun to wonder if running was truly the answer. Thomas had resources and connections. How long would she need to keep running before she could feel truly free? And was freedom worth the cost of leaving behind this place where she had begun to feel whole again? The sound of approaching horses pulled Madeline from her thoughts. She moved to the window, expecting to see Ben returning early. Instead, her blood froze as she recognized the lead rider, Thomas Garner, his face set in the cold, determined expression she knew all too well. Beside him rode another man in a sheriff's uniform, and behind them, 2 more men Madeline recognized as Thomas's business associates who sometimes joined him for poker games. All 4 were armed. Panic seized her. They had found her. Somehow, Thomas had tracked her to Ben's ranch. Madeline's first instinct was to run, to hide, but where? The ranch was isolated, with nowhere to conceal herself effectively. And Ben was out there somewhere, unaware of the danger riding toward his home. Making a split-second decision, Madeline grabbed Ben's shotgun from its place by the door and hurried outside. If she could intercept Thomas before he reached the house, perhaps she could lead him away from Ben's property, keep him safe from Thomas's anger. She made it halfway to the barn when Thomas spotted her, his handsome face twisted in a mixture of triumph and rage. "There she is," he called to his companions. "I told you my sources were reliable." Madeline raised the shotgun, her hands trembling but determined. "Stay back, Thomas." Thomas reined in his horse about 20 yards from where she stood. The sheriff and other men stopped behind him. "Now, Madeline," Thomas said in the falsely reasonable tone she had come to dread, "put that down before you hurt yourself. You've caused quite enough trouble already." "I'm not going back with you," Madeline replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm filing for divorce." Thomas laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Don't be ridiculous. You're my wife and you're coming home where you belong." "The lady said she's not going with you," came a new voice, deep and resolute. Madeline turned to see Ben riding up from the eastern pasture, his expression grim as he positioned himself between Madeline and the unwelcome visitors. "And who might you be?" Thomas demanded, his cultivated banker's voice taking on an edge of contempt. "Benjamin Foster. This is my ranch and you're trespassing." The sheriff moved his horse forward. "Now, Mr. Foster, we're here on official business. This woman is Mrs. Thomas Garner and she's been reported missing." "Missing?" Ben repeated, his tone deceptively calm. "Looks to me like she's standing right here, holding a shotgun and telling her husband she wants a divorce. Hardly seems like a missing person case." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "She's confused, possibly unwell. I'm taking my wife home." "Not from my land, you're not," Ben replied, dismounting and moving to stand beside Madeline. He placed a gentle hand on the barrel of the shotgun, lowering it slightly. "I've got this," he murmured to her. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Foster, I understand your concern, but this is a family matter." "Mr. Garner has the legal right to what?" Ben interrupted. "To drag his wife home against her will, to continue beating her until she ends up dead at the bottom of some stairs." Thomas's face turned crimson. "How dare you?" "Sheriff, I want this man arrested for kidnapping my wife." The sheriff hesitated, looking between Thomas's angry face and the protective stance Ben had taken beside Madeline. "Mrs. Garner," he finally said, addressing Madeline directly, "have you been held here against your will?" Before Madeline could answer, Thomas cut in. "Of course she has. Look at her, she's clearly been mistreated." "My injuries were your doing, Thomas, as you well know," Madeline said clearly, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "Mr. Foster found me hiding in his barn after I fled San Antonio. He has shown me nothing but kindness." The sheriff studied her face, noting the fading bruises. "Mr. Garner, did you cause those injuries?" Thomas scoffed. "She's always been clumsy, fell down the stairs at our home." "Funny how many women seem to fall downstairs," Ben commented dryly. One of Thomas's companions shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Thomas, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Edward," Thomas snapped. Then, turning to the sheriff, "Are you going to do your job or not?" "My wife is coming home with me today." The sheriff looked genuinely torn. "Mrs. Garner, what do you want to do?" Madeline straightened her spine, drawing strength from Ben's presence beside her. "I want a divorce, Sheriff. I will not return to San Antonio with my husband." "You don't have a choice," Thomas said coldly. He turned to his companions. "Edward, James, retrieve my wife." The two men exchanged uneasy glances but began to dismount. Ben's hand moved to his hip where his colt rested. "I wouldn't recommend that, gentlemen." Edward and James froze, looking to Thomas for guidance. The sheriff raised his hands placatingly. "Now, let's all stay calm. There's no need for this to turn violent." "I agree," Ben said evenly. "Mr. Garner can leave my property peacefully and we can all go about our day." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "I'm not leaving without my wife." "Then I suggest you get comfortable," Ben replied. "Because Mrs. Garner isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go, not while I'm breathing." Thomas's hand moved toward his own weapon, but the sheriff was quicker, reaching out to grasp Thomas's wrist. "That's enough, Mr. Garner," the sheriff said firmly. "I didn't sign on for a shootout, and neither did your friends by the looks of it." Indeed, Edward and James were already backing toward their horses, clearly wanting no part in what was developing. "Sheriff," Thomas protested. "You can't possibly—" "I can and I will," the sheriff interrupted. "The law may say a wife belongs with her husband, but it doesn't say I have to force a bruised woman to go with a man she's clearly afraid of." He turned to Ben. "Mr. Foster, I suggest you and Mrs. Garner visit Judge Wilson in San Antonio next week to sort this out properly." Ben nodded, never taking his eyes off Thomas. "We'll do that, Sheriff, thank you." Thomas stared in disbelief. "You're taking their side, after I specifically requested your assistance." The sheriff met his gaze steadily. "I'm not taking sides, Mr. Garner. I'm preventing bloodshed and suggesting a legal resolution." He turned his horse. "Now, I believe our business here is concluded." Thomas's face was a study in thwarted rage. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous as he glared at Madeline. "You belong to me, and I will have what's mine." "The only thing that belongs to you is the ride back to San Antonio," Ben replied coldly. "I suggest you take it before I decide trespassing deserves a more permanent solution." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might ignore the warning, but a look at Ben's steady hand near his weapon, and the resolute set of his jaw apparently convinced him otherwise. With a final venomous glare, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his reluctant companions following. The sheriff lingered a moment longer. "Mrs. Garner, I'm sorry for your troubles. For what it's worth, I believe you." He tipped his hat. "Mr. Foster, good day to you." Only when the four riders had disappeared over the horizon did Madeline let the shotgun drop, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. "He found me," she whispered. "How did he find me?" Ben gently took the weapon from her hands. "Someone must have seen you, or maybe someone in town connected the items I bought with a description Thomas circulated." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "What matters is that he's gone for now." Madeline looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But for how long?" "He won't give up, Ben. You heard him." "I heard him," Ben confirmed grimly. "And I meant what I said. He won't take you anywhere you don't want to go." The intensity in his voice made Madeline's breath catch. "You can't stand guard forever." "I can do whatever is necessary to keep you safe," Ben replied simply. Then, his voice softening, the sheriff suggested we see Judge Wilson. "That might be our best course of action now." Madeline nodded slowly. "Yes, perhaps you're right. A legal divorce would at least give me some protection." She hesitated. "But going back to San Antonio, we'll go together," Ben promised. "He won't touch you again, Madeline, not while I'm alive." The conviction in his voice warmed something deep inside her. In that moment, standing in the yard of a ranch that had become her sanctuary, Madeline realized that her feelings for Benjamin Foster had grown far beyond simple gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Ben's gaze held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the bond that had formed so quickly yet felt as solid as if it had been years in the making. "Let's go inside," he suggested gently. "I think we both could use some coffee after that encounter." The days that followed were tense with anticipation. Ben doubled his vigilance, never venturing far from the house and keeping his weapons close at hand. Madeline tried to maintain her normal routine, but the knowledge that Thomas had found her once haunted her thoughts. Still, there was a new clarity to their situation. The confrontation with Thomas had forced both Ben and Madeline to acknowledge the depth of their commitment to each other's well-being, a commitment that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. They planned their trip to San Antonio carefully. They would travel together, stay at a reputable hotel rather than risk encountering Thomas at his home, and meet with Judge Wilson first thing in the morning. Ben sent a message to his friend Marcus Reynolds, explaining the situation and asking if the wagon train's departure could be delayed if necessary. The night before they were set to leave, Madeline sat by the fire, mending one of Ben's shirts. Ben entered from his nightly check of the property, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "All quiet?" Madeline asked, looking up from her work. "All quiet," Ben confirmed, settling into his chair across from her. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Madeline set aside her mending. "Nervous," she admitted, "but also hopeful. If Judge Wilson grants the divorce, I'll finally be free." "And if he doesn't?" Ben asked gently. Madeline's expression grew determined. "Then I'll keep trying. I won't go back to that life, Ben. I can't." Ben nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." A comfortable silence fell between them. Madeline found herself studying Ben's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. In just 2 weeks, this man had become more important to her than she could have imagined possible. "Ben," she began hesitantly, "after tomorrow, after all this is resolved one way or another, what happens then?" Ben turned to face her fully. "What do you want to happen?" The directness of his question took her by surprise. Madeline had spent so many years navigating Thomas's volatile moods, learning to suppress her own desires and opinions, that being asked so plainly what she wanted felt almost disorienting. She took a deep breath. "I don't want to leave." "Not anymore." Ben's expression remained carefully neutral. "Because you feel safe here." "Yes," Madeline answered honestly, "but not just that." She gathered her courage. "Because you're here. Because when I think about building a new life, I can't imagine doing it anywhere else, or with anyone else." The firelight cast shadows across Ben's face as he absorbed her words. For a moment that stretched like eternity, he said nothing, and Madeline felt a flicker of fear that she had misread the situation, misinterpreted his kindness as something more. Then he stood, crossed the small space between them, and knelt before her chair. "Madeline," he said softly, taking her hands in his, "I've been alone for a long time. I thought that was how it would always be, and I'd made my peace with it." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "Then you appeared in my barn, hurt and afraid, and somehow, in the space of 2 weeks, you've made this house feel like a home again." Madeline's heart raced at his words. "Ben, I'm not a wealthy man," he continued. "This ranch barely turns a profit most years. But if you wanted to stay, to build something here together." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "I think we could make something good, something real." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. "I would like that," she whispered. "Very much." Ben's smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had been his constant companion since Thomas's appearance. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Unlike the demanding, possessive kisses Thomas had forced upon her, Ben's touch was tender, asking rather than taking, offering rather than demanding. Madeline responded with a sigh, her hands moving to frame his face as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get some rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Madeline nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment. "Good night, Ben." He stood, helping her to her feet. "Good night, Madeline." As she retired to her room, Madeline felt a strange mix of anticipation and peace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, perhaps even danger, but for the first time in years, she faced the future not with dread but with hope. The journey to San Antonio the next day was tense but uneventful. Ben drove his wagon rather than riding, allowing Madeline to sit beside him under the protection of his presence, and his loaded rifle kept within easy reach. They arrived in the city by late afternoon. Securing a room, separate rooms, Ben insisted, to protect Madeline's reputation at a modest hotel near the courthouse. "We'll see Judge Wilson first thing tomorrow," Ben said as they stood in the hotel lobby. "Try to get some rest tonight." Madeline nodded, though the thought of being alone in San Antonio, even in a locked hotel room, made her uneasy. "You too." That night, Madeline slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by Thomas's vengeful face and the memory of his hands around her throat the last time she had defied him. She woke before dawn, exhausted but determined to face whatever the day would bring. Ben was waiting for her in the hotel dining room, his expression serious but encouraging. "Ready?" he asked as she joined him. Madeline smoothed her dress, the blue one Ben had purchased for her, now neatly pressed. "As I'll ever be." They walked to the courthouse together, Madeline drawing strength from Ben's solid presence beside her. Judge Wilson was a stern-faced man in his 60s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He received them in his chambers, listening carefully as Madeline detailed her situation and request for divorce. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Garner," the judge said when she had finished. "Do you have any witnesses to this abuse?" Madeline shook her head. "Thomas was always careful. He never left marks where others could see them, and he made sure our neighbors and friends saw only the charming, generous side of him." Judge Wilson frowned. "Without evidence or witnesses, it becomes your word against his." Ben stepped forward. "Judge Wilson, I've seen the evidence of what Thomas Garner did to his wife. When I found her hiding in my barn 2 weeks ago, her face was so badly beaten she could barely see out of one eye. Her ribs were bruised, her ankle sprained from fleeing him." "And you are, sir?" the judge asked, studying Ben carefully. "Benjamin Foster. I own a small cattle ranch outside of town." "And your relationship to Mrs. Garner?" Ben hesitated, glancing at Madeline. "I offered her sanctuary when she needed it," he said simply. Judge Wilson's gaze moved between them, his expression unreadable. "I see. Well, Mr. Foster's testimony is helpful but still not enough under normal circumstances." He sighed, removing his spectacles to clean them thoughtfully. "However, these are not normal circumstances." Madeline leaned forward, hope flaring. "What do you mean, Your Honor?" "I mean, Mrs. Garner, that you are not the first woman to sit in that chair and tell me similar stories about Thomas Garner." The judge's expression hardened. 3 years ago, before your marriage, a young woman who worked at Mr. Garner's bank made allegations of improper behavior and physical intimidation. The matter was resolved quietly." "Resolved?" Ben asked, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what that meant. "The young woman received a generous settlement and moved to California, as I understand it," Judge Wilson confirmed grimly. "At the time, I had my suspicions, but without her testimony, there was nothing to be done." Madeline felt a chill at this revelation. How many other women had Thomas hurt? How many others had he silenced with his money and influence? "So you believe me?" she asked the judge. I do, Mrs. Garner, and I am inclined to grant your petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. He held up a hand to forestall her thanks. However, you should be aware that Mr. Garner is unlikely to accept this decision gracefully. He has considerable influence in this city. We understand the risk, Your Honor, Ben replied, but Madeline deserves her freedom. Judge Wilson nodded slowly. Very well. I will issue the decree today. However, I strongly suggest you do not remain in San Antonio any longer than necessary, Mrs. Garner. Your safety cannot be guaranteed here. Relief flooded through Madeline, so overwhelming that for a moment she couldn't speak. Ben's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. Thank you, Your Honor, she finally managed. Thank you for believing me. The judge's stern face softened slightly. Sometimes, Mrs. Garner, justice requires us to listen to what isn't being said as much as what is. He picked up his pen. Now, let us complete the necessary paperwork. An hour later, Madeline and Ben emerged from the courthouse, the precious divorce decree safely tucked in Madeline's handbag. The bright Texas sun seemed symbolic of the new beginning she had been granted. We should leave immediately, Ben suggested, glancing around the busy street warily. Thomas will hear about this soon enough. Madeline nodded in agreement. Yes, I'd like to go she caught herself. Back to the ranch. Ben's smile at her near slip warmed her heart. Home sounds right to me, he said softly. They had just reached their wagon when a familiar and unwelcome voice called out behind them. Madeline, she froze, her newfound joy instantly shattered. Turning slowly, she faced Thomas, who was striding toward them, his handsome face twisted with rage. What have you done? He demanded, waving a paper in his hand. My clerk just brought word that Wilson granted you a divorce. A divorce! Ben stepped between them, his posture protective but not threatening. Mr. Garner, this is neither the time nor place for a scene. Thomas ignored him, his furious gaze fixed on Madeline. Did you think it would be that easy? That you could humiliate me this way and simply walk away? It's over, Thomas, Madeline said, finding courage in the legal document in her bag and Ben's steady presence. The divorce has been granted. I'm no longer your wife. A piece of paper doesn't change what you are, Thomas spat. My property, mine to do with as I please. Ben's voice was dangerously quiet. You need to walk away now, Garner, before you say or do something you'll regret. Thomas's hand moved toward his jacket, and Madeline felt a surge of terror. Was he armed? Would he really attempt violence in broad daylight on a public street? Before she could react, a new voice joined the confrontation. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? Sheriff Roberts approached, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. He nodded to Madeline. Mrs. Garner, or should I say Miss Garner now? Word travels fast in a courthouse. Thomas straightened, composing his features into the charming mask Madeline knew so well. No problem, Sheriff. Just a disagreement with my former wife. Former being the operative word, the sheriff observed mildly. Judge Wilson's decrees are binding, Mr. Garner. I suggest you respect that. Thomas's jaw clenched visibly. Of course, Sheriff. I was merely expressing my surprise at the suddenness of it all. Sheriff Roberts looked unconvinced. Well, consider it expressed. He turned to Ben and Madeline. Mr. Foster, Miss Garner, can I escort you somewhere? We were just leaving town, Ben replied, his gaze never leaving Thomas. Then I'll walk you to your wagon, the sheriff offered, making it clear it wasn't a suggestion. With one last venomous glare, Thomas turned and stalked away, his rigid posture betraying his barely contained fury. Thank you, Sheriff, Madeline said once Thomas was out of earshot. Sheriff Roberts nodded, his expression grave. I've had my eye on Thomas Garner for some time, Miss Garner. Never could prove anything, but I've seen too many women with accidents in his company. He helped her into the wagon. You take care now. And maybe consider staying away from San Antonio for a while. We intend to, Ben assured him, climbing up beside Madeline. As they left the city behind, Madeline felt a weight lifting from her shoulders with each mile that passed. By the time the familiar landscape of Ben's ranch came into view, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the modest house and barn in warm, welcoming light. "Home," Ben said simply as he brought the wagon to a stop before the house. Madeline looked at the man beside her, this steady, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered not pity but respect. "Home," she agreed softly. That night, as they sat by the fire after a simple meal, the reality of their new situation settled around them. Madeline was officially divorced, free from Thomas's legal claim on her. But more than that, she was at a crossroads, facing choices she hadn't been free to make for years. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked, noticing her pensive expression. Madeline smiled, setting aside her mending. "I'm thinking about possibilities, about building something new." Ben's expression softened. "I meant what I said before. I want you to stay, Madeline. Not just because you need somewhere safe, but because he paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Because I've fallen in love with you." Though part of her had known, hearing the words spoken aloud made Madeline's heart race. After years of Thomas's possessive, controlling version of love, Ben's simple declaration felt like sunlight after endless rain. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "These past weeks, despite everything, have been the happiest I can remember." Ben crossed to her chair, kneeling before her as he had the night before they left for San Antonio. This time, however, he took both her hands in his and looked up with an earnest expression that made her breath catch. "Madeline Garner, I know it's soon, probably too soon, but I've learned that life doesn't always give us the luxury of perfect timing." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I don't have much to offer besides this land, this house, and my promise to spend every day making sure no one ever hurts you again." He paused, a smile touching his lips. "And I'm told I make decent coffee." Madeline laughed softly, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Would you consider becoming my wife? Not today, or even next month, but when you're ready. When the memory of him has faded enough that marriage doesn't feel like a cage." The thoughtfulness of his proposal, offering commitment but with patience, understanding the scars she carried, only confirmed what Madeline already knew in her heart. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Benjamin Foster, and I don't need months to be ready. I just need you to keep being exactly who you are." Ben's face lit with joy, and he rose to his feet, drawing her up with him into an embrace that felt like coming home. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all they would build together. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably do this properly," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. I've kept it all these years, though I never thought I'd have cause to use it." Madeline gasped softly as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "She would have loved you," Ben said with quiet certainty. "Strong, brave, kind, you're everything she valued." They sealed the moment with another kiss, standing in the warm circle of firelight that had witnessed their growing love. Outside, the Texas night spread vast and star-filled, promising new beginnings and healing for wounds both seen and unseen. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day much like the one when they had first met, Madeline and Ben were married in a simple ceremony at their ranch. Judge Wilson made the journey from San Antonio to officiate, and a small gathering of neighbors and Ben's friends witnessed their vows. Madeline wore a new dress of ivory silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning. Ben stood tall and proud beside her, his usually solemn face transformed by a smile that seemed unwilling to fade. "I, Benjamin Foster, take you, Madeline, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly to all present. "I promise to cherish and protect you, to honor your strength and courage, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life." Madeline's eyes shone with happiness as she spoke her own vows. "I, Madeline, take you, Benjamin Foster, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to build our home with love and trust, and to cherish the gift of your heart for all my days." Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction. "What God and love have joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighboring ranches. Fiddle music filled the air as the afternoon progressed into evening, and lanterns were lit around the property, casting a warm glow over the festivities. As Ben led Madeline in a dance beneath the stars, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. "Happy?" Ben asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "More than I ever imagined possible," Madeline replied truthfully. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming." Ben's arms tightened around her waist. "Not a dream. Though I have to admit, finding you in my barn that night feels like the kind of providence I'd stopped believing in." Madeline rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him: leather, pine, and something uniquely Ben. "Do you ever regret it? Taking in a battered stranger, risking everything to protect her?" "Not for a single moment," Ben answered without hesitation. "Best decision I ever made." As the celebration wound down and guests departed with well wishes and knowing smiles, Madeline and Ben stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Well, Mrs. Foster," Ben said, his voice warm with love and promise, "shall we go home?" Madeline turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "We already are home." Ben's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all they would build together in the years to come. As he swept her into his arms to carry her over the threshold of their house, their home, Madeline knew that she had found not just safety, but the kind of love that heals and strengthens, that builds rather than destroys. Life on a Texas cattle ranch would never be easy. There would be droughts and storms, hard winters and scorching summers. But Madeline faced the future without fear, secure in Ben's love and her own newfound strength. And true to his word, from the moment he had found her hiding in his barn, no one ever touched her in anger again. 5 years later, the Foster Ranch had transformed. What had once been a modest operation had grown into a thriving business, with expanded herds and newly fenced pastures. The house, too, had been enlarged, with a new wing added to accommodate the growing family. Madeline stood on the porch, watching as Ben taught their 4-year-old son, James, to sit properly on his first pony. The boys' delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the cooing of their 1-year-old daughter, Sarah, who rested on Madeline's hip. "Mama, look," James called, sitting up straight and proud as Ben led the gentle pony in a circle. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Madeline called back, her heart full as she observed her son's dark hair and blue eyes so like his father's. Sarah, in contrast, had Madeline's green eyes and auburn hair, a perfect blend of both parents. As she watched her family, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. There had been challenges, of course. The first year after her divorce, She had jumped at shadows, convinced that Thomas would appear to reclaim what he considered his property. But as time passed and their life together solidified, the fear had gradually receded. They had received word, nearly 2 years ago now, that Thomas Garner had died suddenly of a heart ailment. Madeline had felt a complex mixture of emotions at the news relief, a flicker of old grief for what might have been had he been a different man, and finally, a sense of complete closure. Ben finished the riding lesson and lifted James from the pony, setting the boy on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. Seeing them approach, Madeline's heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "How are my favorite ladies?" Ben asked as he climbed the porch steps, reaching out to caress Sarah's chubby cheek before leaning in to kiss Madeline. "We're well," Madeline replied, smiling as James scrambled down from his father's shoulders to run inside for a promised cookie. Sarah's been watching her brother very carefully. "I think she'll be demanding her own pony before we know it," Ben chuckled, taking their daughter into his arms. "Is that right, little one? You want to be a rider like your big brother?" Sarah responded with a happy gurgle, patting her father's face with small hands. "She's fearless like her mother," Ben observed, his gaze moving to Madeline with such love that, even after 5 years, it still made her breath catch. "I wasn't always fearless," Madeline reminded him. "When you found me, I was terrified." "Afraid, yes," Ben acknowledged, shifting Sarah to one arm so he could pull Madeline close with the other. "But it takes a special kind of courage to run with nothing but the clothes on your back, to choose the unknown over the familiar, no matter how terrible that familiar might be." Madeline leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I'm glad the unknown led me to your barn." "So am I," Ben murmured against her hair. "So am I." Inside, James called for them, impatient for the family's afternoon ritual of stories by the fire. Ben and Madeline exchanged a smile, heading inside to join their son. As they settled into what had become their usual positions, Ben in his chair with Sarah on his lap, Madeline and James on the sofa with a book of children's tales, Madeline felt a contentment so deep it bordered on awe. From the darkest moment of her life had come a home filled with love and laughter, children who knew only gentleness from their father's hands, and a partnership built on respect and trust. The bruises Thomas had inflicted, both physical and emotional, had long since faded, replaced by the gentle touches and affirming words that were Ben's natural way of expressing love. As Ben began to read, his deep voice bringing the story to life for their children, Madeline caught his eye across the room. The look they shared spoke volumes: gratitude for each other, for the family they had created, and for the healing power of love freely given and received. Outside, the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the land in shades of gold and amber. Inside the foster home, a family built from broken pieces and brave choices continued writing their own story, one of redemption, resilience, and the enduring strength of love that chooses to protect rather than possess.